Boris's decision on COVID-19 restrictions rule was questioned by a SAGE member amid the pandemic. Boris Johnson's decision not to implement stricter COVID restrictions has been described as optimistic at best, reckless at worst by a SAGE member. Stephen Reicher, professor of social psychology at the University of St Andrews, said that Mr. Johnson's decision on COVID rules for the new year is a risky move. Professor Reicher warned of possible further case rises resulting from Christmas. No new COVID restrictions will be implemented before the new year in England. Meanwhile, in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, sweeping measures to tackle the spread of Omicron have been introduced. Professor Reicher said, "The news is mixed. In the longer term, it does look now that Omicron is less serious and leads to less hospitalisations and less deaths." He noted how in the longer term that is very good news. But he warned how this does not compensate for the huge rise in the number of cases. He suggested how the high case numbers are more serious than the lesser seriousness of the disease, as he claimed this rise in cases, not the severity of the disease, is leading to a surge in hospitalisations. But Professor Reicher went further with his analysis, as he said testing figures may not be accurate. He suggested Britain's testing ability is being overwhelmed and there has been underreporting at Christmas. He added, on top of that, the figures don't take into account the numbers of infections that will have been caused by the socialization that went on at Christmas. We are putting ourselves in a very risky position by allowing the infections to run out of control. So that if we find those numbers going up in a few weeks, it is too late to do something about it. Although he is at an all-time low in his premiership, so it is unclear how much a say Mr. Johnson will have. The PM may bend to rebellious Tories' calls for no more restrictions. Or he may follow the advice from government scientific advisers calling for tougher measures. Tory MPs hoping to succeed the PM were warned to avoid backing tough measures, or risk damaging their chances to take Mr. Johnson's job. At the last cabinet meeting, Chancellor Rishi Sunak, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng, and Transport Secretary Grant Shapps spoke out against strict measures. Some scientists have long been calling for a circuit break lockdown, with independent SAGE saying it needed to be rolled out before Christmas for it to have any effect on curbing Omicron. SAGE scientists published some research that outlined the need for stricter measures. Data released by the UKSN on Thursday looked fairly optimistic, which may steer the procrastinating PM to introduce tougher guidance. If the statistics shared in tomorrow's meeting appear somewhat optimistic, ministers may call for no restrictions to be introduced for the time being. As we await to learn when the next COVID meeting will take place, we look at the possible measures the PM could introduce this week. Last week, addressing the nation in a pre-recorded message, Mr. Johnson said, "We can't rule out any further measures after Christmas, and we're going to keep a constant eye on the data, and we'll do whatever it takes to protect public health." But the likes of Professor Stephen Reicher, a member of the government's Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE, warn Omicron is coming at us like an express train. Professor Reicher insisted that the government must give the public a good, clear message about how serious the crisis is. A full lockdown could constitute a clear message, but given the latest UKSA data, it is unclear on how necessary a full lockdown is. It would be expected to last until pressure on the NHS significantly falls. Professor Reicher believes we should be doing something now by bringing in measures to decrease the number of infections and hospitalisations. He described Westminster as something of an outlier in comparison to the devolved administrations and the rest of Europe who have brought in restrictions to tackle Omicron. Scotland has banned nightclubs this new year and cancelled Hogmanay celebrations, also bringing in table service measures. Wales and Northern Ireland have also closed nightclubs and brought in the rule of 6. Tuesday saw a record 129,471 COVID cases reported across the UK.